Hello, Harbour. It is wonderful to be with you again this morning, if not in the flesh, then in the spirit. I hope you're well, and I hope that you're loving each other from a safe distance. Romans 8, 6-11. To set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the spirit is life and peace. For this reason, the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. And those who are in the flesh cannot please God. But you are not in the flesh. You are in the Spirit, since the Spirit of God dwells in you. Anyone who does not have the Spirit of Christ does not belong to him. But if Christ is in you, though the body is dead because of sin, the Spirit is life because of righteousness. If the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will give life to your mortal bodies also, through his Spirit that dwells in you. Irenaeus of Lyon helpfully pointed out that Paul does not reject the substance of flesh, but shows that the Spirit must be infused into it. The picture that Paul is painting for us here can only be understood when we see flesh and spirit as one in humanity. John Chrysostom puts this quite forcefully. Quote, "Are we to cut our bodies to pieces in order to please God? Should we become murderers in order to practice virtue? You see what inconsistencies result if we take these words literally. What Paul means by the flesh in this passage is not the essence of the body, but a life which is carnal and worldly, serving self-indulgence and extravagance to the full." End quote. He goes further, reassuring us that Paul does not mean that those clad in the flesh are incapable of pleasing God. Rather, he is speaking of those who, in John Chrysostom's words, quote, "put no store by virtue, whose thoughts are totally carnal and who are caught up in the pleasures of that kind, paying no attention to their soul, which is incorporeal and intellectual." One benefit of normal life grinding to a halt as it has is that, with the exception of those who are working on the front lines, and may God bless the vital work that they're doing, we all now have plenty of time to pay attention to our soul. We're all keeping Lent now. We're all observing the Sabbath now. We're all living like monks now, some of us. And I would encourage you to use this time to really examine where you are in life with God. There's only so much Netflix that you can watch. I would advise that you look at your current personal daily devotional routine, and I would double it. I would really get to know the Spirit that dwells within you. Really engage with that. Take your fear and your anger and your sadness and even your boredom to the Lord in prayer. What else would you be doing with it? Back to John Chrysostom. He makes sense of Irenaeus' view of spirit fused into flesh, first by observing that, as we can see for ourselves, some things are good, some are bad, and some are indifferent. While according to John Chrysostom, quote, "the soul and the flesh both belong to things indifferent, since each of these may become either good or bad. The spirit belongs to things which are good and can never become anything else, and the mind of the flesh, i.e. wickedness, belongs to things which are always bad." Notice the use of the phrase, mind of the flesh. Theodoret pointed out that Paul is not telling us to leave the body, but to be set free from the wisdom of the flesh. That is, free from the kind of wisdom that tells us to bulk buy spaghetti hoops and toilet roll. Rise above that thinking of the flesh. Because you can see that in bulk buying the spaghetti hoops and the toilet roll, that you're depriving others, and that you don't have the Spirit of Christ in you when you act in such a way. And to lack the Spirit of Christ is to be godless. When Paul uses the term Spirit of Christ, he isn't saying that the Spirit is Christ, but rather that anyone who has the Spirit has Christ as well. As John Chrysostom put it, quote, "Where the Spirit is, there is Christ also. Wherever one person of the Trinity is present, the whole Trinity is present too. For the Trinity is undivided and has perfect unity in itself." End quote. It is a powerful thing in these extraordinary times when we all need to pull together as a community to support one another, to be able to see God as persons in perfect unity. What a powerful thing it is to be able to say that that is the God in whom we place our hope. Paul paints a vivid picture of this God when he says, quote, "The Spirit of him that raised Jesus up from the dead." It is, I dare to believe, by the grace of this God, that we see the infusion of spirit in the flesh that Irenaeus described. Tertullian puts that concept more vividly in relation to our reading when he says that the resurrection of the dead implies the resurrection of their bodies. End quote. And Augustine spoke about this imagery of the resurrection of the body in a way that I'm sure many people will be able to relate to in these present circumstances. That, quote, "As long as we are in this life, there will be no lack of the annoyances occasioned by mortal flesh." End quote. Amidst the annoyances occasioned by the mortal flesh, how can we live in a way befitting the Spirit of Christ? Polycarp put it this way, quote, "He who raised Christ up from the dead will raise us up also if we do his will and walk in his commandments and love what he loved, keeping ourselves from all unrighteousness, covetousness, love of money, evil speaking, false witness, not rendering evil for evil, or railing for railing, or blow for blow, or cursing for cursing, but being mindful of what the Lord said in his teaching." End quote. Now let's remind ourselves of what the Lord said in his teaching. "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbour as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." So, in the days ahead, pray. This is how we grow in love for God in heart, soul, and mind. And support people in whatever way you can. It might be helping with the shopping. It might be a chat on the phone. It might be keeping your distance. It might be washing your hands more out of respect for the people that live with you. In doing those things, praying and helping, we are uniting our soul and flesh in the work of God and living in a way worthy of the Spirit of Christ. God bless, and Amen.